Let's talk about kerosene pickles. Let's talk about old man Remshaw. Let's talk about Barney's sidecar. It's always fun to hang out with y'all. A loaded goat is causing a stir from the panic he is creating. Come on in, take a seat. It's 2 chairs, no waiting. Sit a spell and tune right in. We are about to start the show. We have a lot to talk about with the folks that we all know. Opie, Andy, and Otis, Barn, and the darlings too. This will be amazing. It's 2 chairs, no waiting.
Episode number 862, Spooky Time of the Year.
It's 2 chairs, no waiting. It's 2 chairs, no waiting. Let's start the show.
Ooh. Spooky time of the year. Hello, everybody. I'm Allan, Newsome, the host of 2 Chairs, No Waiting, and it's great to have you here with me. This is the spooky time of the year, so this is a little bit different kind of episode because we're going to be telling some stories that might be, well, they're semi-scary. They're not really even scary, but I think you're going to enjoy them. We've got a new story, a brand new one that's coming up right off the bat, and then we're going to revisit some past fun stories we've had, so I hope you're going to enjoy that. But right now, we have a phone call that came in that I really think you're going to enjoy. It came in and they tell us a story that I believe you might find just a little bit spooky. And after that, you're going to hear some other stories, and then I'll show back up at the end. Thanks for being here with me. I want to thank all of our patrons and Patreon members and the members over on YouTube. Thanks to all of you who keep this show going, and I hope you're going to enjoy this. So let's head over and hear our first caller.
Hello, this here is Andy speaking. I heard from my friend Dale Garrett that you were looking for some Halloween-type stories. So I wanted to call in and share this one with you and your listeners. I guess we can call it The Legend of the Glowing Remshaw Roses. What happened was Floyd had stepped out of the barber shop to go get some lunch. So my deputy, Barney Fife, was a holding court telling this here story about Remshaw and the goings-on at his place.
Now, folks, I'm not saying it's true, but I ain't saying it ain't neither. Everybody knows I ain't one to spread gossip. That's Floyd's department, but I am one to uphold the law. And the law says when there's suspicious activity, you investigate. It all started on a dark and stormy Friday the 13th, which also happened to be Aunt Bee's canned pickle casserole night. A scary dish by itself, but that's another story for another time. Earlier that day, Floyd was in the barber shop telling Andy and me about strange happenings out near old man Remshaw's place. Floyd said, "Now, Andy, I don't like to say this, but I heard from Clara Edwards' cousin's neighbor that old man Remshaw's roses are blooming out of season again. Big blood red ones, practically glowing." Floyd's eyes got wide. Oh, my. Evil and rich soil. Those Remshaws always did have the richest soil in Mayberry. See, the story goes that years ago, old man Remshaw had more than just a mean streak. He also had a moonshine still down in his basement. His moonshining was the subject of many fights. One night, he and his wife Mabel had a hollering match that could be heard all the way down by the fishing hole. I'm telling you, it was loud enough to rattle the courthouse windows. Next morning, Mabel was gone. Some say he did her in with a pair of garden shears and buried her under the roses. Others, mostly Andy, say she got fed up with old man Remshaw and just up and moved in with her sister in Raleigh. Either way, those blood-red roses just keep on blooming, and that Remshaw place is haunted with the ghost of Mrs. Remshaw. Andy responded, "Now, Barney, stop spreading rumors." I said, "I'm just telling you what I've heard, Andy." So that night, Andy, me, Floyd, Gomer, and Goober piled into the squad car to check out suspicious noises reported from the old Remshaw property. Floyd insisted on coming along for moral support in any haircut emergencies that might arise. We pull up, rain pouring, thunder cracking, and I tell everyone to stick close. Floyd whispers, "Barney, what if the ghost needs a trim?" I said, "Floyd, ghosts don't need haircuts, they need exorcism." We sneak around the house. The roses are swaying in the wind, and suddenly this low, mournful hum floats through the air. Floyd grabs my arm and says, "Barney, I think that's her. That's Mabel. You can tell by the tone." Oh, she had a beautiful voice. She had a middle-aged soprano range. Gomer starts trembling like a leaf. Goober's teeth are chattering, and I'm trying to look brave even though the weight of old Betsy was starting to make my own hand shake a bit. Even Andy looked a bit spooked. Then, out of nowhere, lightning flashes, and a figure with a black shawl over its head rises up from behind the rose bushes. Floyd yelps, "She's here!" and dives behind Andy, covering his head with his barber's towel. Gomer faints. Goober runs for the car, and I start pointing my revolver with my one bullet and shout, "Halt! Spirit of the undead, identify yourself." During the excitement, my pistol accidentally fired into the rose bushes. The figure stops, lowers the shawl, and there she is. Mabel Remshaw, alive. Turns out she did move to Raleigh years ago and said she was only back to pick up her late husband's gardening tools. Andy, calm as ever, says, "Ma'am, I'm terribly sorry for the disturbance. My deputy here got a little carried away." Mabel looks at me and says, "Deputy, you shot my roses. Look at that one. Why, you nipped it right in the bud. I'm not too happy about that," I muttered. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry about that, ma'am." And then Floyd, peeking from behind Andy, says, "Oh, Mrs. Remshaw, may I say that your hair looks lovely for someone thought to be deceased." She gave him a look that could curdle milk. We apologized again, loaded up the car, and drove back toward town in silence until Floyd finally said, "You know, Barney, ghosts or not, those roses do have a beautiful glow to them. I'd bottle that color if I could." Andy chuckled and said, "Floyd, that's 'cause Goober's flashlight is still laying under one of them bushes. He dropped it when he ran back to the squad car." We all laughed until we remembered Gomer was still unconscious back there in the mud by the rose bushes. So we turned around, went back to the house, and picked him up. When we got there, old lady Remshaw was trying to revive Gomer, who was starting to come to. And guess what she was holding in her hand? A pair of garden shears. On the ride back to town, everyone was mostly quiet except Andy, who was explaining to Gomer what had happened while he was out cold. Gomer listened intently and at the end quietly said, "Shazam!" Gomer thought to himself for a moment and then asked, "Well, if old lady Remshaw is alive and well, where's old man Remshaw?" Gomer said, "What if it was old lady Remshaw? What did old man Remshaw with them garden shears and planted 'em under them rose bushes?" And then I said, "What if she came back to Mayberry to get the evidence?" We all slowly glanced at one another and swallowed hard, even Andy, who spoke up and said, "You know, come to think of it, I don't know of anybody in town who has seen old man Remshaw since that night." We continued driving back to Mayberry in complete silence. Every year since, them blood-red roses keep blooming out of season, and nobody knows why. And that's the story of the glowing Remshaw Roses and one of the spookiest nights I ever experienced in Mayberry.
And that's pretty much the story Barney was telling. I hope you enjoyed it. I appreciate you having me on the show.
We've talked about the golden arm in the past. Andy always told that around the campfire like this. I found a new story to tell you. This story's about Bill Morgan and Tom Edwards. You know, they sat around nursing their umpteenth beers at Fat Daddy's Saloon. There's a loud, smoke-filled, neon-lit honky-tonk in the foothills of the North Georgia mountains. Fat Daddy's has always been their bar of choice. On weekends, they always went there, but ever since Bill and Tom had lost their jobs at the bottling plant, well, they were there almost every night drinking away the last dollars that they had. If you hung out at Fat Daddy's long enough, the same things would happen every night, like clockwork. The phone behind the bar would ring at precisely 7 o'clock, as Miss Floyd would call, making sure her husband hadn't snuck over there after work. At 8:30, little Jake would lose yet another round of pool to Mike the Mouth Kelby, and he'd hear about it the rest of the night. At 9:30, someone would play Whiskey River on the beat-up old jukebox. At 10 o'clock, sitting alone at the end of the bar, Chief B.S. would tell his tired old tale of the gold of Sawnee Mountain to anyone who would listen. Now, some of you young folks may not know what BS means, but for you older folks, you surely do. Bill gave the chief that name because he got tired of hearing the same old stories coming out of his mouth. The chief was an old Cherokee with long gray hair, wrinkled, leathery skin, piercing eyes, and a beaten-up old hat with some kind of turkey feather sticking out of the brim. His ancestors, well, they had lived and hunted in those North Georgia mountains long before the white man arrived. And he knew those mountains so well that he could hike through them blindfolded if he had to. That didn't matter much to the good old boys there at Fat Daddy's, who considered the chief a weird outsider. But maybe it was their dire employment situation that led Bill and Tom to suddenly pay attention to the chief as he told his story to yet another unsuspecting drunk. He always started his tale by telling about the Trail of Tears and how Chief Sawnee, one of the most respected Cherokee leaders in Georgia, refused to go. Instead, Chief Sawnee, he hid in those North Georgia mountains with his loyal braves, and when he died, he was buried in the mountains which now bear his name. According to the story, he was also buried with a large stash of gold coins, which remains buried with him today. This was part of the story where everyone in the bar would laugh at the old man and tell him he was nuts. That's true, the chief would insist. The gold is buried with Chief Sawnee deep in the Swanee Mountain, but is protected by his spirit. I can tell you how to get there, but I'd never go there myself. Oh, I don't need gold bad enough to have a ghost hounding me for the rest of my life. Well, maybe the chief didn't want the gold that badly, but Bill Morgan certainly did. He moved 2 bar stools down toward the old man and said, "Tell you what, Chief, you draw me a map, and I'll go up there and get that gold, and I'll even give you a cut of it." Tom, he looked at his friend in disbelief, said, "I ain't going bushwhacking up there the wild goose chase." Well, Bill put his arm mockingly around the chief and grinned a big phony grin. "It ain't no wild goose chase, is it, Chief? That gold's up there, and we're going to get it." Well, the chief took a long, contemplative swig of his beer. Then he stared at Bill with his big, piercing eyes. "You two church-going men?" he asked. "What difference does that make?" asked Bill with a chuckle. "Like I said, the gold is protected by Chief Swanee's spirit," the old Cherokee answered him. "If you go in there, you got to go in there with a pure heart. So a church-going man will stand a better chance with the spirit than a sinful one." Well, Bill, he rolled his eyes and grabbed one of the bar napkins and said, "Yeah, whatever. Draw us a map on this napkin, and we'll go up there and see if your story's true or not." Then, winking at his friend Tom, he whispered, "If Chief B.S. is right, we're going to be rich this time tomorrow. Besides, what have we got to lose?" Well, after the chief had drawn on that napkin, he drew a map. Well, Tom followed Bill as he staggered out of the bar. Bill tossed his keys to Tom and said, "You drive. I'll show you where to go." "You can't be serious," Tom answered. "Come on, you're drunk." There ain't no gold up there. Sides, it's dark out. But Bill wouldn't be swayed. He said, come on, I need your help. We'll just take a quick look, I promise. Now, Tom, he knew he had done plenty of stupid things himself after one too many beers. And his friend Bill had always been there to bail him out of any kind of trouble he had. So with a heavy sigh, Tom grabbed a couple of flashlights from the back of his truck and said, all right, which way do we go? For hours, it seemed, Tom drove Bill's truck up a curvy 2-lane road that led to the highest elevations there in North Georgia. The lights from town, they disappeared, and soon they were enveloped in darkness. Alone on the road, with only the intensely bright stars above keeping them company. In fact, Tom had never seen so many stars, so beautiful and bright. Or perhaps he'd just always been too busy to notice them. Maybe those Cherokees back then didn't have it so bad after all, he thought to himself. There it is, Bill suddenly screamed. Tom slammed on the brakes and looked where Bill was pointing, and on the side of the road stood a wooden, unoccupied lean-to with a big black pot inside. A crudely painted sign nailed to a tree above it said, boiled peanuts, $1. Tom rolled his eyes. These tourist traps were a dime a dozen up in the hills, especially in the fall when the leaf watchers drove up with their shiny SUVs from Atlanta. Tom looked at the map scrawled on Bill's napkin. Indeed, the chief had drawn the peanut stand with a long dotted line behind it, indicating a dirt road. Well, Tom turned onto that dirt road behind the peanut stand and plunged into the deep, dark forest. For several miles, the dirt road was surprisingly in good shape. But then all of a sudden it got worse. With Tom's truck was rocking violently from side to side in the deep ruts. Thick clouds of dust blanketed Tom's headlights, obscuring what little of the road he could see. It was obvious that no one had been down this old hunting road in years. Well, Tom was just about to turn around when the road suddenly dead-ended into a thick, impenetrable wall of old-growth trees. Well, Bill, he looked at that map, clutched in his sweaty hands, and grinned, said, we're here. Where's here? Tom thought to himself as they exited the truck. The woods surrounded them. They were pitch black and silent, save for the loud crickets. They seemed to be everywhere. Well, Tom, he followed Bill as he plunged into that old-growth forest. The trees wider and taller than anything he had ever seen before. The ground rose up steeply before them. And all the beer Tom had consumed that night quickly perspired from his body. He was now totally sober, wondering what in the world was he doing out here. Panting and exhausted, Tom rested against a tree. After a few minutes passed, he noticed that Bill's flashlight beam had disappeared. He called out Bill's name, but only the crickets answered him. Bill? He called again. But there was still no answer. Now worried, Tom cried out as loud as he could, Bill! Bill's faint voice, it drifted back from somewhere in the darkness. Hey, man, I'm over here. Look over. Well, see, Tom, he ran frantically in the direction of Bill's scream. His flashlight beam bouncing off the ominous trees. He screamed his friend's name over and over, but only the mocking crickets talked back. Then his flashlight beam cut across this small cloud of dust floating in the distance. He ran over in that direction, only to suddenly freeze in his tracks, his eyes widening. A few inches from his feet was a yawning black hole, leading straight down into the black, uncharted darkness. "Tom, you up there?" screamed Bill hoarsely from somewhere in the dark depths. Tom pointed his flashlight down into that hole, revealing a rocky pit nearly 50 feet deep. Bill looked up at him from the bottom, bleeding gash right there on his face. But he was standing. He then gave Tom this boyish grin and said, "Look what I found." Well, Bill turned on his light, and Tom could see that he was standing in some sort of a cavern entrance with numerous holes in the wall leading to God knows where. But in the dancing beams, he could also see eerie paintings on the wall, pictures of the universe, of animals, of warrior figures, strange tribal masks. On the ground beside Bill's feet, Tom swore he saw a human skull buried below the red clay. But it was what he saw next that made his jaw drop. Sparkling in Bill's flashlight beam was a dirty burlap sack filled with gold coins. Bill looked up at Tom and grinned. "What do you know?" he said. "That engine was right." Well, they wasted no time hauling that bag of gold out of that pit and running it back through the woods. Bill had sprained his ankle slightly in the fall, but that didn't stop him from making a beeline toward that truck. And as they roared back to town, they whooped and hollered. They yelled out the windows, listing all the things that gold was going to buy them: sports cars, motorcycles, beach houses, beautiful ladies. But they agreed that the first thing they would do is march right back into that bottling plant and tell their old bosses to, well, you can imagine what they might have told them. Several days passed after their discovery, and Tom became concerned that he hadn't heard anything from Bill. So Tom's phone calls to Bill went unanswered, and nobody at Fat Daddy's had seen him, which was unusual. Had Bill left town with his share of the gold? So one day, Tom drove over to Bill's place to check on him. Bill lived in an old trailer home as it was a barren, overgrown family farmland several miles out of town where it sat. He saw Bill's truck in the driveway, and he went up to the door and knocked, but there's no answer. He tried the doorknob and was surprised when the door suddenly creaked open. Tom's stomach turned when he was greeted by this awful smell, worse than any barn or latrine he had ever run across. Covering his nose and his mouth, he walked in cautiously into that trailer. He noticed a light burning in Bill's bedroom. He walked over the door and he peeked inside. Oh, what he saw next froze his blood. There was Bill, laying on his soil bed, horrifyingly thin, his eyes bulging out of his pale, skeletal face. Tom could see Bill's exposed rib cage underneath his filthy shirt, heaving up and down with each pained breath. "What happened to you?" Tom blurted out. But Bill, he didn't answer. "Can you hear me?" Tom asked. Again, Bill didn't answer, but instead he rolled his eyes as if directing Tom towards his bedside. Tom moved over toward him. He leaned down close to Bill's face. In a painful, hoarse whisper that took every ounce of his strength, Bill said, "He won't let me get up." Tom grabbed Bill's arm, but it wouldn't move, as if it were superglued to the bed. He tried his other arm and his legs, but they wouldn't budge. Tom knew that Bill was too frail to resist him. Something else was holding Bill to that bed. Something powerful and invisible. Tom lunged for the phone to call for help, but it was dead. The phone was dead. Frantic, he ran into the kitchen, heated up a bowl of canned soup, and then brought it back to Bill's bedside with a glass of water. But Bill spat up everything Tom tried to feed him. His eyes deliriously rolling back in his head. As Tom watched his friend suffer, his mind suddenly crossed that line between the real and the surreal. That moment when you finally realize you don't really know everything about how this world operates, and anything is possible. So without thinking, Tom grabbed Bill's share of Chief Sawnee's gold, still sitting in that burlap sack in his closet. And then he rushed home, grabbed his own share, and sped back up to the hills, past the boiled peanut stand, down an old hunting road, through the creepy old growth forest, up to the edge of that deep pit. And with tears in his eyes, he called out to the skeletal remains below, and he said, "I'm giving you back your gold, Chief Sawnee. I don't need it, and I'm sorry I took it. I'll never bother you again. Just please let my friend go, please. He's my only friend in the world. And that's the only thing that matters to me, I swear." And with those words, he tossed those bags of gold coins back into that pit. Then, using his bare hands, he shoveled dirt and branches and rocks and anything he could find over that hole, so no one else would ever find it. Then he bolted back to his truck and sped towards town. Tom knew he had to find a phone fast, and the closest one was at Fat Daddy's, a few miles away. The sun was quickly setting over the hills, and he knew that Bill didn't have much time. Tom knew he'd get strange looks wandering into the bar with filthy clothes and cut, bleeding hands, but he'd find a way to explain it later. When Tom finally roared into Fat Daddy's parking lot around 10 o'clock, he was surprised to find it empty. The lot was usually full on a Saturday night. Maybe they closed early, Tom thought fearfully. Well, Tom was relieved to find that the door was unlocked, and he ran inside and found it dark and empty. He ran behind the bar and grabbed the phone and dialed Bill's sister in a neighboring town. She picked up his cell phone after one ring. "Bill's been rushed to the hospital," she said in a panicked voice. "He called me a few hours ago and said he couldn't get out of bed. The doctor said he's lucky to be alive. And I'm trying to get Mom on the phone. He looked awful, Tom. What happened to him? Do you know?" Tom, he couldn't answer. But the news of Bill's condition it sent waves of relief through him. He assured her that he would head straight to the hospital when he hung up the phone. You've been up to Chief Sawnee's cave, haven't you? A sudden voice from the darkness said. Tom nearly leaped out of his skin. Sitting at the bar was old Chief B.S., nursing a beer. What do you know about it? Was all Tom could say. Well, the chief took a long, contemplative swig of beer, stared at Tom with his piercing eyes. And he said in a voice that seemed deeper and older than the one that Tom had heard so often. That gold isn't going to do me no good. You're welcome to it. But I told you to accept it with a good heart. That's all I ask. Now use it that way, or I'll come back to see you again. With that, the chief polished off his beer and strolled leisurely out the door. Tom looked at the chief's bar stool, and sitting there was the dirty burlap sacks of gold that Tom had thrown into that pit earlier. Tom could barely believe his eyes. He then charged out of the door to find the chief, but only the stiff evening breeze rolling off the North Georgia mountains greeted him. The chief had vanished into the night. In the years that followed, as Tom and Bill, they both married and finally settled down, Chief B.S., or Chief Sawnee, as they called him to anyone who would listen to their crazy story, he was never seen in those parts again.
I'll tell one.
Listen. You hear that? That's a hoot owl. That reminds me of a story. A long time ago, right in these very woods, there lived an old hermit. And they say that buried right here in these woods, there was this hidden treasure. And this old hermit used to look for that treasure day and night. And one night, he went into a real dark cave looking for the treasure. And suddenly, there were two eyes looking at him, burning like coals of fire. And the old hermit reached out his hand and he touched something furry. And the thing went, "Arr!" It was a bear. It bit his arm off. The old hermit took out his knife and he killed the bear with his other arm. And while he was stumbling around trying to get out of the cave, he found the treasure. He took it and he bought himself an arm to replace the arm he had lost. And it wasn't an ordinary arm. It was an arm made out of pure gold. Many years later, when the old hermit died, a thief who had heard about this golden arm came and stole it. And then a strange thing happened. When they came to get the old hermit to bury him, he was gone. He disappeared. And they say right today he's looking for that golden arm. Without it, he can never be buried. And he's looking right here in these very woods for his golden arm. And you can hear him at night. You can hear him saying, "Who, who stole my golden arm? Who stole my golden arm? Who stole my golden arm?" You stole my golden arm. Well, that's it. There's your ghost story. Now let's get some sleep. Let's get some sleep so we can get up real early.
And now remember, boys, that was just a story. That's all it was.
Yeah, that's
Nothing to be
right.
frightened about, right, Ange?
That's right.
Yeah.
Now let's get some sleep so we can get up real early in the morning.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Oh, those are some spooky stories for the spooky time of year. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And again, I want to thank all of our patrons over at Patreon and my YouTube members and all of you who donate to help support the podcast. Thank you very much. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know what you thought about the episode. You can give me a call at 256-513-9526 or email me at floyd@imayberry.com. I'd love to hear from you. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time, right here on Two Chairs.